This is Class 3, Video 1, and we're talking about the right to exclude. The right to exclude is referred to as some as the most essential stick in the bundle. It gives the holder a broad right to exclude other people from the property. So the next case that we review in this course is going to explore what happens if someone violates this right to exclude. In that case is Jacque v. Steenberg Homes, Inc. The facts of this case are as follows. Steenberg Homes, Inc. sells mobile homes, and they had an order to deliver to one of Jacque's neighbors. Now, Jacque owned a large tract of farmland, and the easiest way to get to Jacque's neighbors was to go over part of his land. There was a main public road, but that road was covered under 7 feet of snow, and there was a sharp turn. If you've ever seen a large truck, large rig that was transporting a mobile home, you know that they're very difficult to maneuver and handle. So a Steenberg employee went over to the Jacque's home and asked them if he could transport the mobile home over the property, and Jacque refused. Well, the Steenberg employees decided they were going to still go ahead and haul the mobile home across Jacque's field, so that is what they did. Now, this act caused no actual damage to the field, but Jacque still sued in trespass. The jury awarded $1 in nominal damages and $100,000 in punitive damages. The lower court set aside the punitive damages award, and here the Wisconsin Supreme Court was reviewing their decision. So, what exactly is trespass? Well, trespass is the wrongful entry on another's property. It requires intention, which means that the party voluntarily entered into another's land. And it does not require subjective intent to trespass or any other bad faith. So all that it requires is the intentional act of entering on the property of another. There's some exceptions to the trespass rule, and one is that entry that's made under privilege is not trespass. For example, if you enter someone else's property with consent, it is not considered trespass. Or if a police officer or entered, or some other arm of the state entered while in hot pursuit or due to an emergency, then it might not be considered trespass either. So there are some exceptions to the rule. The Jacque court were answering the following question. Should Steenberg be liable for $100,000 when the trespass caused no measurable damages to the Jacque's property? To answer that question, the court decided to look at some public policy reasons. And they based their decision on 3 primary reasons. The first was that if the court did not allow for punitive damages, then the right to exclude would have no practical meaning because it is a right that is created and that needs to be protected by the state. The second reason was that if the Jacques had allowed repeated trespass, then it could have resulted in adverse possession, something that the Jacques had already previously experienced. We haven't gone over the concept of adverse possession yet, but when there is adverse possession, a landowner loses his property rights to the trespasser. So the court agreed with this line of arguments. The third point of reason that the court adopted was that if the landowner has confidence in the legal system, then they would be less likely to resort to self-help measures. And so by enforcing punitive damages when there were no actual damages, it allowed parties to go to the court so that they can seek their justice without resorting to self-help measures like going and harassing each other, etc. So the court held that where nominal damages are awarded for trespass, a jury may also award punitive damages. So the court in this case really focused on how the law of nuisance should be enforced, whether or not punitive damages should be allowed in cases where there were nominal damages. That is more of a question of how, not why. So we're going to take some time now, and I'm going to ask you some questions so that we can explore why the law of nuisance should be enforced and why the right to exclude should be protected. So Jacque v. Steenberg established the right to exclude. Now we're going to look at another case that looks at the exceptions to the right to exclusion, or at least one of the exceptions. And that case is State v. Jacque. The facts of State v. Jacque are as follows. Tedesco, who was a farmer, employed migrant farm workers in his farm during the time of harvest. Now, these farm workers lived on the land that they farmed during that season. The defendants, there were two defendants, Jacque and Tedesco. They wanted to enter the land, one of them to provide medical assistance to the farm workers, and the other to provide legal assistance. Now, both Jacque and Tedesco were employees of federally funded programs that were created to benefit farm workers, migrant farm workers in particular. So Jacque and Tedesco entered the farm and they refused to leave when they were asked to. And as a result, they were charged they were charged with a criminal trespass. And they were eventually convicted. Procedurally, the New Jersey Supreme Court reversed this decision. And the question the court was grappling with was whether or not Jacque and Tedesco were entitled to enter Tedesco's land. Now, a little bit of background information just to provide some context. This case took place at a time in which there were no cell phones. There were really no other means of communications with these migrant workers. So to provide any services or to talk to any of these workers, Tedesco and Jacque would need to go and talk to them in person, and they would need to go over this land in order to do that. Now, the living conditions in the Tedesco camp were pretty poor, as were the living conditions in most migrant farm communities. It is also not unlikely that the legal advice that Jacque was going to give the workers would have been contrary to the interests of the landowner, the farmer. The court begins by first rejecting two arguments, and one is based on landlord-tenant law. The other is based on constitutional arguments relating to the First Amendment or the Supremacy Clause. Then they proceed with an analysis. And I'd like you to think for a moment about what you think the rationale for the decision actually was. Did the court rule for Jacque and Terrace because they were permitted to enter the property due to necessity? Was there an implied statutory right of access? Or was it because of some type of utilitarian balancing? To help you in answering that question, I have reprinted a quote taken from the case on this slide. Property rights serve human values, the court said. They are recognized towards that end and are limited by it. A man's right in his real property, of course, is not absolute. The court in Jacque ruled that the defendants were not in breach of any possessory right of the farmer. Now, let's apply some of the standards that were used in Jacque and try to determine if trespass has occurred in the following hypos. So the first one we're going to look at A, B, and C, who were all farm workers living on Tedesco's property, and they decided to hold a large birthday party for their co-worker D. They invite 10 friends from a nearby town who enter the property to attend the party. Has a trespass occurred in this situation based on the standard used in Jacque? Next typo. X owns a vacant apartment building in a large city. A group of homeless people enter the building through an unlocked door and begin living there as squatters. X discovers the squatters 2 months later. Has a trespass occurred? Hypo 3. M owns the farm that adjoins the Tedesco property. M's farm workers live on M's property. N and O, two union organizers, enter M's land in order to convince the farm workers to join a union and thus improve their wages and living conditions. Has trespass occurred based on the Jacque standard? Hypo number 4. T operates a casino in Atlantic City. He discovers that gambler G is counting cards in order to improve his odds of winning at blackjack. T asks G to leave and never return. G enters the casino 2 days later and begins gambling. Has G committed a trespass based on the standards set out in Jacque?